أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من اللعين الغوي الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على خيرة خلق الله أجمعين وهو رحمة الله للعالمين وهو أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الميامين المهديين ولعنة الله دائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد فقال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أيحسب الإنسان أن يترك سدى. Continuing with the subject of last night regarding the heart, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala poses a question in Surah Al-Qiyamah, Ayah 36. It's quite common in the Quran to pose these sorts of questions where Allah says, do human beings think that they've been left without a purpose? Suda, yani mahmal. Without a purpose, that they don't have a purpose in their existence for why they've been created, or for their very existence. That do they think that there's some sort of finite system, that there's some sort of, that all they are some sort of complex information system. Like we're a complex system with a set of inputs and information, and then when we die, that's gone. Or we're just matter, and that's it. It's like, they say, okay, matter can't be destroyed, so we just go from being one form of matter to another form of matter. But that's all we are, it's just matter. There's nothing more to us than this. That, this idea of the machine-like being of human beings, that we're nothing but machines, right? And we see this in terms of neurology and the study of neurosciences and things as well now, basically saying that if we have the right kind of calibration or systems, we can mimic the human being using artificial intelligence. So we can mimic emotions, we can mimic language, we can mimic responses, we can mimic all kinds of things. So the question that atheists put forward, or this kind of culture of indifference towards religion, is, well, what's so special about human beings? And then what's so special about the God who's made them if we can reproduce them? I mean, now they're even coming up with a way of producing a baby. It hasn't been proven yet, but it's getting there, we'll see, outside of the womb of the mother. So recreating that womb, but it's not perfect. I mean, it can be used for a certain amount of time, but the fact that human beings are even exploring this realm of the world where they can you imagine a child being grown in a laboratory, not a rat, a baby, a human being, but it still needs a chromosome from a male and a chromosome from a female. That it still needs. And it still needs a system of blood, and it still needs all those things. Whether it's inside or outside the body, it is still a miraculous system which relies on natural properties. But the question that comes to this, and this is a slightly philosophical question, but I see we have some, we may have few brothers here, but we have educated brothers and sisters here today. So I'll pose this question here, not that we're not educated, but I mean, this is a group of pretty intellectual, enlightened brothers and sisters. So I'll put this question forward here, which is, are we just commodities? That where does this idea that we're just matter take us? Because this is clearly not something that from an Islamic perspective that we accept. And for us, we can attempt to disprove this or to reject this belief or this idea on the basis of our intellectual tradition of Islam, because the intellectual tradition of Islam is based on reason and investigation and inquiry and sciences, both transmitted sciences and intellectual sciences, meaning hadith and sunnah, and things that are not from hadith and sunnah, but are just based purely on logic and deductive reason. We have two sciences in Islam, manqulat and ma'qulat, the transmitted sciences and the intellectual sciences. And both of these sciences, one from revelation and hadith, one from just basis on logic and deductive reasoning, they both come to something known as first principles. As Muslims, we have to have first principles, yani awaliyat, our first principles. And when we look at our first principles, we see that Islam is a deeply rational religion. It's very deeply rational. But it tells us one thing which is very important in Islam, the deen of Islam, is everything has a meaning in this universe. The green color of the blades of grass has a meaning. There's a reason why it's green. That green symbolizes something. It's not only green because of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll and the function of chlorophyll gives us an idea of how it became green in its physical color, but it doesn't tell us why it's green. Why green? Okay, we know that there's a scientific or chemical process that goes on in order for the plants to be that color. But what does that color mean in the grand scheme of the universe? Why green and why not red? Islam tells us that has meaning in it. And the fundamental premise for the way we arrive at this kind of meaning is through something called aql, which is the intellect. And it is that intellect that tells us that we cannot account for one thing. If we think that we can account for everything, there is one thing that we cannot account for. There's many things we can't account for, but there's one thing certainly we cannot account for in its total way, total sense, which is our existence. We come to one of two conclusions regarding that. If we just simply go on the intellect, not Quran, Hadith, leave that aside for a moment, just the intellect. It's one of two conclusions we come to. Conclusion number one says that we don't know where we've come from. We don't know why we're here. We just know that we're here. Because ultimately we don't know. Because people say Big Bang, where did Big Bang come from? Black hole, where did black hole come from? I mean, it'll be what we call tasalsul. You just keep going and going and going and going. Or the second way of answering this question is that because we are finite, we were given existence from the infinite. Call it God, call it haq, call it reality, haqiqa, whatever you want to call it. Bhagwan, or whatever names people give it. Brahma, the Father, whatever names, people give names to things. Of course, for us it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's the proper name. But, I mean, people give different names to the infinite. But it's the infinite that gave rise to the finite. That cannot be denied, that the finite had to come from, finite cannot come from finite. Can't. Something had to give rise to the finite. We're finite, we're limited. We have a lifespan on this earth. We cut, we bleed, we're very fragile. But what gave birth, or what rather gave existence to this finite being? And this is where the story of Aql begins in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and I would say Hinduism as well. This is where the story of Aql and reason comes in. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ. That go back to your origins, to your masdar, go back to your beginnings. Think about where you have come from. How did you come into this world? And then once we do that, we start using our contemplative faculties. We start thinking and contemplating over this whole thing of origins and beginnings and where we came from, how we're here, where we're going. We start asking ourselves these certain questions. We start reading between the lines. We start seeing miracles in nature. We start looking out into the world. We look within ourselves, and we're in a state of complete awe and at the majesty of, one would say nature, the other would say the act of God. But why use the word nature? Just say the act of God. Nature is a politically correct word of saying the act of God. It is by simply wondering, if I did not bring myself into existence, then how do I exist? And if everything around me is contingent on something else for its existence, even in space, so everything else is contingent on something else, whether it be microwaves or I don't know what, speed of light, all these things, gamma rays, I don't know what. There's all kinds of things that are contingent on each other. So is there anything that's not contingent? Doesn't rely on something else for its existence, for its ability to operate? And then we're left with two kinds of existence in Islam then. وجود المطلق or وجود المقيد. There's absolute existence, which is not reliant on anything. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the essence and the dhat of Allah, which is forever unknowable. We cannot know what this is. And then there's wujud al-muqayyid, which is this us. And the path to understanding this existence is the path of Ahlul Salikin and Ahlul Arifin. The people who are journeying on the path to understand this world. Amir al-Mu'mineen. When we look at the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen, everything he teaches us points us to understanding existence itself. To understanding our presence in this world. So then I come to another question. Before I get to that, recite as-salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
It's a little bit of a course in theology today. It's Shahr Ramadan. Which brings me to another premise. How, in the name of our merciful Lord, do we even conceive and understand any of this? One word. Al-aql. Allah has given us aql لإدراك هذه المعارف. He's given us this intellect so that we can perceive this knowledge. That's the purpose of the intellect. That's why the Ayyimah have said the first thing that Allah has created is the intellect. Al-Nur al-Awwal huwa al-Aql. The first light is the intellect that Allah has put within us. The ability to understand. The ability to even take this further, to understand that we understand. How do you know that you've understood? What being understands that they have understood? Are you aware of your own understanding? Yes. How? Can you find that in an MRI? Find it for me in an MRI. Exact point that you could say 110% without a doubt, you just discovered that you understood something. You could say, okay, there's a color, or the neurons are firing in this direction. We're seeing the brain light up. But can you find that understanding? That's unseeable. But how? How? How can physical, material science make sense of that? Using the best equipment of neurological equipment and things like this. How? But the aql tells us, when we think about it, it tells us, هي علة الموجودات وحقيقة الكائنات ومصدر الحادثات, that this reason, this aql that we have, is the reason for existence itself. It's the bottom line, the causation of existence. That if we did not have this aql, there would be no wujud. Because we wouldn't be aware of our wujud. We wouldn't even know that we exist. We wouldn't be self-aware. We wouldn't be sentient. Aql. Allah does again and again and again. Use your intellect, use your intellect, use your intellect so many times. That it's through the intellect that we see the acts of God, sifatul fa'aliyah, dhuhur al-af'al, intishar al-mawjudat. That it's through the intellect that we see the manifestation of the universe as a theater of God's actions. It's only because we have the intellect that we can perceive that. That we can really perceive that and understand that. And we would waste our life away. أَيَحْسُبُ الْإِنسَانَ أَنْ يُتْرَكَ سُدًى. And human beings would waste their life thinking they've not been created for a reason, when Allah has bestowed upon them this ability to think. That when we go to a hospital and we get an MRI or a CAT scan, does that tell the story of a human being? Or do you think human beings are more complex than an MRI or a CAT scan? To the scientists, that may be just what they need to know. But to us, it doesn't. And this is why we live in a world, unfortunately, where people have been alienated from God. They've been alienated from being in touch with themselves. Because their relationships, the things around them, are functional. They want to know what it can do for me, not how it can nourish me, but what it can do for me, how it can serve me, how it can function. Whether it be our relationships or the things that surround us in our life, it's functional. So human beings become alienated, they become estranged from God. They become estranged from their own intellect. They're not able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's majesty right in front of them. And they become lonely, become depressed. They become hopeless. They could live among 1 million people, yet they feel like they live on a desert island. They become alienated from the sense of community as well. Because their life is not necessarily about, it's about what people and things can do for them. It's utilitarian, right? What's their utility? What role does it serve? Like your phone, our phone, our apps, our computers, our everything around us, right? It serves for us. But does it help improve us being in touch with ourselves, with understanding ourselves and understanding the Lord who's created us? I don't think so. Yet Allah says, "Inna hadi tadhkiratun faman sha'a ittakhadha ila rabbihi sabila," that this is a reminder, and whoever wants to take it as a path can take it as a path in Surah Al-Insan. It's up to human beings whether they want to take the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. But if they do take that path, they should know that it's the path of using their intellect. They have to use the intellect. That is the calling of the human being. Islam is a profoundly thinking-based faith. But not thinking in terms of whatever I want from that. In terms of thinking from a starting point. That we start with the point that we don't know how we came into existence. And then we begin the whole journey from there. Certainty and yaqeen that God exists. Allah exists. I've come from Him and to Him I will return. And while I live in this short life, I want to do something to try to honor the fact that He has given me existence. You know, Amir al-Mu'mineen, before I get to that, recite a salat ala Muhammad wa
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
Amir al-Mu'mineen was once asked, what is creation? What a question to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And he said, this is the unseen heart. The physical heart beats 100,000 times a day. The heart that's behind our sternum. Do you know how many beats in a lifetime? 3 billion beats on average in a lifetime. Our heart will beat 3 billion times our physical heart. If that's the incredible power of this physical organ, what is the power of the unseen heart? And this is the physical heart. 3 billion beats in a lifetime. 2,000 gallons of blood are transported through the heart a day. 83.3 gallons per hour. Have you ever even tried moving 40 gallons of water? Leave aside blood. 40 gallons of water. Do you know how heavy that is? 40 gallons of water. We're talking about 83.3 gallons per hour. Per hour runs through the hearts. If the average life, let's put it at 80 years currently, that would put it at 58,400,000 gallons of blood runs through the heart. And this is just the physical heart. What about the qalb that Allah is saying, that the qalb through which we understand and through which we have ma'rifat of His wujud and His existence? If that's the physical heart, which itself is a miracle, what about the heart that lies behind that heart? Even the word qalb, if you reverse the words, it comes to qabala. Qalb, qabala, right? If you just, there's a science of huruf in Islam, in Islamic sciences. If you move it, it becomes qabala, which now has a whole different meaning. To accept, to turn. It also indicates because it's related, right? We believe qalb and qabala are related. Qabla means that which came before. Qabla. That the heart bear witness to the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before its physical existence. Bal shahidna, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alastu bi rabbikum qalu bala shahidna. In Araf 172, Allah says, am I not your Lord? And they said, yes, you are. We bear witness to it. But that witnessing is a witnessing of the heart. Qabla. Before the existence of the qalb. Qabla al-qalb. Before the heart. That the insan, human being, is required to testify to the existence of the one who created this heart 5 times a day in salah. If we think of the majesty of just what we have in the physical heart, I think 5 times a day to give thanks is not much to ask. It's really not much to ask for. We're not even speaking about the majesties of the of the unseen heart, which we've already spoken about as being the organ of cognition where the finite and the infinite meet, right? Where the limited and the unlimited meet, in a sense. Look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Hajj. فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَعْمَى الْأَبْصَارُ وَلَكِنْ تَعْمَى الْقُلُوبُ الَّتِي فِي صُدُورِ. That it was not their eyes that are blind, but it was their hearts that are blind, their hearts that are in the chest that are blind. That after so much neglect and so much neglect and so much neglect, it's almost like diabetes when it's left unchecked. Right? Diabetic retinopathy. Right? It's where people can lose their eyesight because of diabetes. Because when they leave their glucose levels unchecked, constantly the diabetes is completely out of control, they can lose their sight. Likewise, when someone's life is out of control, the heart loses its vision. It loses its ability to see. Ta'ma. Yani it becomes blind, meaning it could see before. But what is the sight of the heart that Allah is speaking of in the Quran? As far as we know, the physical heart that pumps the blood doesn't have eyes in it. It's that heart or intellect that Allah created through which we may know Him. And that's why we read in the books of Islamic spirituality some incredible descriptions of the heart, right? Al-qalb huwa al-alim billah. That the heart is the one that has knowledge of Allah. Al-amal lillah, the one that works for Allah. Huwa sa'i ilallah, the one that ventures and goes towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the heart. Huwa al-mutaqarrab ilay. The heart is the one that comes close to Allah. Huwa al-mukashif bima indallah wa laday. It is the heart that sees the delights that Allah has prepared for it. Not our physical eyes. Not our hands. Not our limbs. Not our tongue. No. It's the heart that sees this. And it's that same heart and intellect that is resting within the heart that tells us that we are aware of ourselves. That tells me at that moment, each and every one of us at this moment are having a spiritual experience. How do you know? The very fact that you're aware of something unseen going on within yourself. You're aware that you are sitting here and listening and you're processing information, you're understanding that information, and you're aware, very much fully aware of your own existence at this moment. Isn't that a spiritual experience? I think if that's not a spiritual experience, then what is a spiritual experience? But we sometimes fail to see the reality that is sitting right in front of us, that of the merciful Lord who's given us this existence. And there are some other points I want to mention. Inshallah, tomorrow night I'll mention them. We don't need to extend the discussion because we have more things to cover, inshallah, tomorrow night. So to summarize the points here tonight is one, the intellect that Allah has given us is our most valuable asset. Absolutely, the mind, the reason that Allah has given us. But that reason has to have a starting point. It has to accept one premise, that it's come from somewhere. Now it has to figure out how, why, and what do I do about it. But that's reason. You don't need the Quran to tell you that, per se. The Quran wakes us up to that reality. As the Anbiya come for what? لِيُثِيرُوا دَفَائِنَ الْأُقُولِ. Right? To have effect on the depths of the intellects, to bring out what is already within us. Because Allah has already implanted that spark within us. The spark of creativity, the spark of knowledge, the spark of wanting to know Him, of wanting to get closer to Him. That's the intellect. Now, how could we be created without a purpose? It's unfathomable. It's truly unfathomable. And the Muslim, first and foremost, has a love for the intellect, mahabbatul aql. But again, that intellect is not something that takes you wherever you want to go. It has a starting point, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That intellect is then humbled because it accepts the fact that it did not create itself. And then the journey begins from there. And that's in a nutshell the story of the human being. It's one aspect of the story of the human being. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq in this remaining nights of Shahr Ramadan to pay heed to this aqaid. Because if we don't understand these fundamental beliefs, my dear brothers and sisters, we will be lost. Our youth will be lost. Our children will be lost because they won't have the answers that they need to be equipped with out there. To be Muslim, to follow Islam. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise our children to be among the mu'mineen. And to be among the salihin, the righteous ones. And to be among the qaniteen, those that are dutiful and obedient towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to be among those that use their intellect. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.